Hello, my name is theoliverpickard and welcome to beautiful Limousin, France. It is beautiful here, but it's also autumn, which means the roads are full of goo and grit and cow muck and rotted down leaves and horse chestnuts. And that's not very good for our cars. And one of the most common questions I'm asked by you guys is, what's the best way to look after my car through the winter months? And my first reply is always, look after your chassis, make sure it's always painted and nice. But that's not always the full story, because one of the best ways to protect your chassis and make sure that it's painted and make sure that it's all nice and then it's not rusty in the first place, obviously the less rusty it is before winter, the less rusty it's going to be after winter. But one of the best ways to make sure of that and do that work and protect it is to make sure that it's as far away from the road goo as possible, to lift it up out of the muck and the goo. Now you'll see that, and I'm sure you've seen in previous videos, that Jolene is actually lowered. And for those that don't know, Jolene is a 1963 2cv AZA mixed, and that means that she doesn't have shock absorbers and stuff like that. And she is slightly lowered within the factory suspension settings. But that means that in winter she's very close to the road and very close to the goo. So in summer I lower her because it makes her handle better. But in winter I raise her up. So today I'm going to show you my way of setting 2cv suspension and a reliable and quick way to raise it and lower it every single year to the same numbers, to the same settings, without losing the stance of your vehicle. So literally you can lower every single wheel to the same amount, up and down, within 25 minutes, the entire car. But to do that, you want to make sure that the car first has the correct stance for a 2cv. I often see a lot of 2cvs that are way too low at the front and way too high at the back, or even low at the back and high at the front. You want to make sure that the car sits right. Now, if you want to set it to factory settings, the factory settings are to within a certain margin. So 2cv ride height does vary, and that's because it's adjustable, and that's what we're going to do today. But if you are adjusting it, make sure that you do it correctly the first time. So if your car's set to the correct stance, what I'm going to show you today is to lower it up and down within that stance. But if your car is completely to cock to begin with, you're going to need to set it right. Well, your car, I'm going to show you how to do it equally on all four corners, quickly, easily, within like 20 minutes, and you don't even have to be on level ground. If your car was set up correctly on level ground beforehand, you can actually adjust your ride height on all four corners equally using this technique. The tools that you'll need to do this job are a trolley jack. Now you can use a bottle jack, I suppose, or you can use the standard 2cv jack. I don't like using the standard 2cv jack because it can chip away the paint here, which is a rust spot on a 2cv. You can actually see that Jolene's full of road goo now. I do live rurally and the roads are pretty minging at the moment. You'll need a rubber jacking puck. I use a piece of oak, as you can see. That just stops the jack slipping, and it also stops it taking the paint off underneath the car. This is a squeezy tube full of grease. This is actually bike grease, or it was bike grease when it was new. I use, to do my knife edges, the suspension links underneath Jolene. Instead of using a paintbrush full of grease and kind of daubing it on, I find that doesn't get the grease into the fitting. And so what I did, I'm a cyclist, so I have tubes of grease like this lying around. And I like squeezy tubes because they have a nozzle on them like this. And instead of a grease gun to do, like, they have no grease nipple on them. So I find that if you squish the nozzle up into the knife edge and then squeeze the grease tube, it gets the grease inside the knife edges, which better lubricates your knife edges. which you should be doing around this time anyway. So before we adjust our suspension, it's a really good idea if you grease your knife edges. You'll also need a 9mm spanner, which are about as common as tortoise fur. So I'm going to be using an adjustable spanner because I do own a 9mm spanner somewhere, but I don't know where it is. So this is the adjustable that I keep in my car's toolkit. And the other thing you'll need is a rule. Now, you can use a plastic ruler, but I prefer a stainless one. And the reason is, it's very clear are your numbers. When you're underneath the car, you're not getting under it, but you'll definitely be lying on your side in the shade, and it's much easier to see the numbers on a steel rule. This was my granddad. He worked for Rolls-Royce Aerospace. That's why it says Rolls-Royce Limited on it. So yeah, that is that. Cardboard box to lie down on because you don't want to be lying down on the cold, damp floor. And also some masking tape. My car's already got masking tape on it. I'll show you why you need the masking tape in a moment. But the first thing we need to do is we need to put the trolley jack underneath the car and take the weight off the suspension. So we don't need to lift the wheel off the ground completely, but we do need to take the weight of the car off the suspension and lift the car up a bit. So I'll just move my... You may notice that the legs on my overalls are a bit short. This isn't a fashion choice. I'm wearing overalls because it's cold. Same reason I'm wearing gloves. It is a bit chilly out this morning. I say chilly, it's like 8 degrees or something. But it's colder than I'd like it. But it is the time of year to do this. I should have done this when it was nice and warm weather and lovely, but I was too busy enjoying my car. For my jacking point, I'm going to use, instead of using the angled legs of the chassis, I'm going to use, you're going to need to angle the camera. Okay, so we're going to, first, before we do anything, we're going to grease up our knife edges, right? I've already done it, but I'll show you how I do it. So you get the little end, and you shove it kind of up in this corner here, and you just give it a little squeeze. Like that, and it'll pipe in, see? It spooges out. And then the other side. And this works much better than using a paintbrush, because a paintbrush like this is from using a paintbrush, and all it does is cover everything in grease. And then you do the other side, because there's a gap there in the back, so that you can spooge a bit in like that. And it literally takes 2 minutes. I've just done it twice. Obviously, once beforehand and once showing you. But that means that now you're going to adjust your suspension, and when you adjust it, the knife edge that's the pin in here will touch brand new grease. So it's going to be a lubricated movement. Now also notice where I've put my jack. I've put my jack next to these two nuts here, which is the bolting for the axle. The reason for that is that I don't want to put it anywhere near my fuel tank. I want to keep it as far away from my fuel tank as possible, because if the jack ever did slip, it will slip and go through the fuel tank. And the last thing you want is a punctured fuel tank. So I'm keeping it well away from my fuel tank to do this job. And literally, it's right next to the factory jacking spot anyway. And it's a nice strong spot in the chassis because it's all reinforced. But we're not going to lift her up completely. We're just taking the weight off the suspension. Oh, I suppose I should tell you how 2CV suspension works if you didn't know. If you own a 2CV and don't know how 2CV suspension works, don't feel bad. That's why I'm here. So, there's a big pivot here with bearings in it. And then there's an arm. On the back, it's a trailing arm because it goes backwards. On the front, it's a leading arm because it leads the car, it goes forwards. And when the suspension goes up and down, the arm goes up and down. The end of the arm is of course bolted to your wheel. And here there's a rod. This rod goes all the way down the car and is connected to the spring can. Now then, inside the spring can is, unsurprisingly, a spring, but there's actually two. There's one for the front and one for the back. And on an earlier car, they're actually interconnected by the can itself. And when the wheel goes up, it pulls on the rod. The rod travels through the spring to the back of the spring and compresses it like this. And that is basically how 2CV suspension works. So it works through what's called sag. So the weight of the car holds the spring tight, and then when it hits a bump, it's already tight and it has lovely nice travel. It also means that when you hit a bump in the road and the wheel goes into the hole, rather than the car falling into the hole, because that's the limit of the suspension, because the spring's already compressed slightly, the wheel can go into the hole and the suspension can go into the hole, evening out the road without the car falling into the hole. I hope that makes sense. Now then, for what we are doing today, that's as much as you need to know. I could go into more detail and stuff, but it doesn't hugely matter. I've got my masking tape here. I'm going to jack Jolene up a little bit more. Like I say, I just want to take the weight of Jolene off the suspension. And that's about as much as we need to do. Always take your jack handle out. The reason I take my jack handle out is if I forgot my spanner or I forgot my masking tape or something like that, and I have to go and get something, and then I walk back round the car, the last thing you want to do is kick your jack stand, kick your jack and fall over. And like, you fall over, your arm goes under the car, you kick the jack flies out the car, your car lands on your arm or something, I don't know. It's just not a very good thing to do. You don't want tools falling over. Just be safe, please. Thank you. That has been a public service announcement from the Oliver Pickard. Please be safe. Right, we're going to need a piece of masking tape. Now then, simply, what we're going to do is, I need a close-up camera. Right, so what we're going to do is, here's your pivot with your knife edge in it. Here's the rod end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a piece of tape and I'm going to put it nice and parallel to the ground. So this piece of tape has to be straight. It's not to the, it has to be 90 degrees from the threaded rod. And what we're basically going to do is we're going to wrap it around like that, making sure it's nice and straight. And that'll do it. And the reason I'm going to do that is my technique for raising and lowering 2CV suspension is very, very simple. So, here is a rule, and here is the edge. Now, we'll place this on 0, yeah? And we can see that that says 40. It doesn't actually matter that it says 40. What it actually matters is that this gives us a scale for lowering and raising the car. And here on the rod, there's actually 2 flat sections, which sometimes you can turn it by hand, and sometimes not. Sometimes you need your spanner. But this allows us a nice scale to lower and raise our car. But it allows me, it doesn't matter where your piece of tape is on this unit, it doesn't need to be in the same perfect place on every single rod. As long as you have a piece of tape that's square and you make that number 10 millimeters or however much you want to raise or lower down, because by screwing this in or out it raises and lowers the car, that's how much you're going to adjust the suspension on each corner. So it makes sure you're adjusting the suspension by the same amount on each corner. It's the simplest and most effective way to do it that I've found. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be screwing the rod into the rod end. And that, of course, will raise up the suspension because it shortens the distance between here and here, which pulls the arm down. If you are lowering a 2CV, please be incredibly careful, because you are screwing the rod end out. And the last thing you want to do is lower your 2CV massively and leave a tiny little bit of thread in this rod end. Because if it's a tied thread or anything like that, and you should rip the rod out of the rod end, obviously that makes for an unsafe car. But also at the front, your car will need caster adjustment arms, and you can buy modified rod ends that are much longer. They're basically like accordion rod ends, but you can buy even longer ones than that to totally get your car super low. But one of the coolest things about 2CVs is that they have really long travel suspension, so it's a bit like slamming a Land Rover, in my opinion, and it's a bit weird. If that's what you want to do, then that's awesome, but please make sure you do it safely. This video does not cover slamming your 2CV. I do lower my 2CV in summer, but that's for handling purposes to get the roll center lower, and I do it within the factory settings. One of the things that lowering a 2CV does is it makes your caster incorrect at the front, so you need modified front suspension arms as well as different rod ends at a very bare minimum. Please, if you're lowering a car, do it safely. I don't want to hear anybody out there who's gotten hurt because they've followed this video and adjusted their suspension against my advice and made their car dangerous. Please don't do it. Thank you. Like I say, please be safe. So, we have 40mm, and I'm going to screw this rod end in. Now I've moved it, I might be able to do it by hand. Yep, there we go. Sometimes once you get it going, especially the rear for some reason, but once you get it going with the spanner, you can do it by hand, which is obviously much easier. Come off. And obviously be very careful of your brake line. You don't want to smack in your brake line. So I'm just going to now check how much have I adjusted it by, and we've adjusted it by nearly 5mm. See that? It was 40 and now it is 37. Check it again, and we are at 35. So 5mm will make a considerable amount of difference. Remember that your millimeters adjustment here do not equate millimeters of adjustment in vertical terms. They do, but it's not equal. So 5mm adjusted here is not 5mm ride height. It's a huge difference. So now all I have to do is go around the rest of the car and adjust every single one by 5mm. So there we have it. I actually did it in the rain in the end. I'm a bit moist. But I've adjusted Jolene's suspension. I've raised her up a little more than 5mm in the end. That's because I want to keep her out of the slush and the salt and the muck that is to come. And obviously the easiest way to do that is to lift her up out of the way of it. But please remember to adjust your car within the parameters given by Citroen. It's up to you to look up the numbers. I'm not going to tell them to you, because if you have a 60s car, it's going to be different to a 2CV6. It's going to be different to an Army. It's going to be different to a Diane. It's up to you to look those numbers up and adjust your car accordingly. If you do want to adjust your car out of that, whether it be raising it up more for off-road stuff or slamming it on the ground, please seek professional advice and make sure you're in a place where you can legally modify your car and make sure that your insurance company knows and all that stuff, because the last thing we want is for something bad to happen and you not be covered. So yeah, We're out of the goo and the muck. My next job is the wheel bearings. After the wheel bearings, I'm going to be given an alignment. So that's 2 videos you've got to look forward to there. New wheel bearings and a new front end alignment. If you have any comments or questions, oh, that's another thing, please bear in mind your car will drive differently. If you raise the suspension 6 inches, if you raise the suspension like 15 centimeters, obviously your car's going to drive drastically differently. And it may, like, obviously if you raise your car up, it's going to be a lot more wobbly than if it's lower. So please bear in mind that if you go out driving, your car will handle differently. So please just take it easy out there. But if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down in the comment section below. If you like this video, please let me know that you liked it by clicking the like button. It also lets YouTube know that you liked it, and that helps me massively because it allows YouTube to know that I exist, and I'm not sure they know yet. If you want to see more videos like this, then please hit that subscribe button and I will make more videos like this. Like I say, if you like this video a lot and a load of people subscribe, then there will be more 2cv suspension stuff on the way, maybe, probably. Like I say, there's an alignment to come. We're going to check the front end alignment because the wheel bearings need doing, and then after that I want to check everything and just make sure she's all okay. Because currently the alignment's a little bit wonky. I didn't do it. It's one of the things I should have done when I bought her, but I didn't have the tools to do. But now I have the tools to do, and so that's a video that's going to be coming. So you've got a bunch of stuff to look forward to. Thank you all for watching. Please be awesome to each other, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.